We're here today at MotoIQ headquarters with a 1991 Acura NSX owned by my friend Regan Yu. And Mike Kojima, our editor-in-chief, is here today to take a look and see all the cool stuff he's done to it.
So Regan, this is like one of my favorite cars. I've always wanted an NSX, but I could never afford it. And I guess you did the right thing and played the market perfectly in the timing of buying yours, right?
Yeah, I guess I'd say so, Mike. Back in 2007 was when I moved over from an S2000 into the NSX, when I started to notice that the prices were becoming quite low for these cars. Back then you could find a good one for 25, 30, 35,000. And as far as a mid-engine, double wishbone suspension, all aluminum car, it's a bargain. It was a bargain back then. So that's pretty much how I ended up with a heavily modified Acura NSX.
Well, it's a really fine example. Did it take you a long time to find it?
To find it, no, but to build it did go through quite a bit of iterative, creative design, so to speak. Learning from folks like you on what's the proper way to build a car to really augment your driving style. Because I'm not a race car driver by any means, but I do love to drive it aggressively, do track days, and go up into canyons here in LA.
Well, your car is a particularly fine example. So let's go inside and take a close look at all the goodies you got.
Sure, we'd love to.
So those don't look like the stock headlights. Are they the late model ones?
They're the late model 2002 and up Honda factory headlights, that's right, with the factory OEM HID units in there. It's got the Type R style carbon fiber hood with the grille. You can't miss the wheels, Volk Racing's forged wheels with a big brake kit. The OEM style Type R rear spoiler, but more or less, Mike, I wanted it to look somewhat stock.
You have a carbon diffuser in the back too, I think, right?
It is a carbon style lower valence, I guess is what they call it. I wouldn't dare call it a real diffuser.
What about some stuff on the interior? I see some really cool stuff, like it looks like an S2K dash.
There's a great gentleman in Europe who makes a factory conversion kit to use an S2K cluster on the NSX. It's got the Type R style steering wheel, which I think, for a lot of NSX owners, because of the manual rack, you lose a lot of the damping with the SRS airbag style, and you put a Momo steering wheel of some sort, Sparkle, whatever, really enhances your driving experience and connectivity. The bucket seats, I wanted to stick with something in between, so I went with tried and true Recaro pole positions on the bucket seats. It's got a 6-point harness for the track whenever I get a chance to get out there. Also using the HKS FCON V-Pro system and their camp setup allows me to use digital style readouts for all the important gauges.
What kind of harness bar do you have? I mean, that's a pretty well-engineered one, it looks like.
Yeah, thanks. It's a gentleman, his name is Dave Levy out in Oregon. He's an ex-racer himself, and he has produced a harness style that is similar to what Comtech used to race with back in the day, where it goes in the seatbelt point down here and also on the seat mounts back there, and gives you kind of this really rigid, solid point to mount your harnesses.
Yeah, it's very difficult to mount things like that in an aluminum chassis, because it's not like you can weld steel to aluminum.
That's a good point. Also, everything as far as my build ethos, or whatever you want to call it, was everything that I did to this car, I wanted 100% reversible. Should the time ever come when I can no longer find parts, when things break, then I need to turn it back into stock and pass it on to someone else or give it to my kids or whatever, then at that point it's still reversible.
Well, it's a really smart move when you have a car that's like a total Japanese classic, and probably one of the most iconic Japanese classic cars.
I'm biased, but I definitely agree with you there. These have gained more popularity over the years with the announcement of the new NSX, but I think in some ways it's really shed some light onto the old chassis and how good it really was back then, when this was designed in the late 80s and was sold in 91. with some romantic Ayrton Senna history. It's a great car.
Well, that's where I feel Acura really messed up with the new NSX, because I feel like they should have built on the DNA and the heritage of this car and created a lightweight 4-liter naturally aspirated car, but instead they built this heavy, complicated technological terror that they threw away all this heritage and DNA and came out with this spaceship that is kind of isolating and not too rewarding, I think.
Engaging, whatever you want to call it, right?
Tell us a little bit about your brake system.
It's a Rotora set, and it's back when Rotora didn't make their own calipers. They sourced it from somewhere in Taiwan who made them for Greddy and Grex, and that company made them for, I think, JBT, and that company made it for a bunch of other resellers. And because the bias is right, it's about 60%, 61% bias towards the front. And because they use such a big rotor, which is in the back, it's 14 inches by 32 millimeters, and the front's 13 inches by 32 millimeters, I'm able to use street compound pads, and they cool excellent, they make no noise, they can withstand the heat that a set of our compounds would have, but they last forever and they cool perfectly. And it's just kind of, it's at that point where, because the rotor's so big, it cools so well, I don't chew through pads like I did before with the OEM setup. And the modulation on the brake, especially with this car after I upgraded to the newer style 2000 and up NSX ABS system, then it just transformed the whole braking of the car.
What can you tell us about your engine?
The old race team Comtech made a supercharger package that was carb approved. So this is the only carb approved kit for the car.
Does it have a water to air intercooler?
No, this one doesn't have any intercooler aside from just a meth injection kit that sprays after the blower.
Whose system do you use?
This one is an old Snow Performance unit that is boost dependent. So as boost increases, you can adjust it so the level of spray and the amount of liquid that it pushes into the intake stream is, you can increase at the same rate or an increased rate or lower rate, whatever. But I can run it all day long, and we even tried to run it over in a thermal. It was, gosh, I don't know, 115 degrees outside. Who knows what the track temps were? And I was the only one left running. I was still running. As long as you run a really good radiator, then on this car, it does fine.
What kind of radiator are you running?
This car runs a massive radiator, so it's a copper core, a twin core, and it fits just like OEM. It doesn't need to be any thicker or smaller. It fits 100% like OEM. And it's really, that's one of the things that I'm actually amazed about the car, is how that small radiator can cool a mid-engine car, which is notorious for, having issues with cooling. Being it can sustain those and keep the water temps under 200. 195, 196, 197 is about the highest I ever get with this car, and Fahrenheit. And it just cools it all day long. So,
how about the oil cooler?
It has a side mount oil cooler, which is right over here, and it's a small 13-row, and that's just enough to keep the oil temperatures on a really hot day, probably under 245 degrees. Once in a while, it'll peak to 250, but for the most part, running temps on a 90-degree, 85-degree day, it'll stay probably around 210, 220, like a button willow or something.
What kind of headers and exhaust system are you running?
Sure, this one's running the Comtech headers, so that's also carb approved. It is running a set of high flow cats, and it's running a old JDM titanium exhaust muffler on here.
Looking up at the top, I see remote reservoirs. So you're running JRZ shocks?
Yeah, these are JRZ two-way RS Pro shocks on this car, and probably one of the best things I've done to the car is to get a decent set of dampers. Dampers, as I've talked to you for many years in the past, it's always been a little bit of a black art. I haven't been able to. I still think there's maybe 20 or 30% more performance left to squeeze out of these dampers that I don't have the knowledge for to squeeze out, but definitely working my way through those adjustments and getting it to a point where the car is doing what I want it to do at any time.
Well, mid-engine cars are especially tricky in adjusting them.
Yeah.
The underneath of the car kind of follows, I guess, the whole theme of, enhancements, but, not too crazy and to be fully streetable. So it's well thought out, well engineered mods that enhance the car on the track and then really hard driving, but don't take away too much for it either. So do you want to explain your front suspension to us?
Sure. So it's using the stock, really well engineered double wishbone suspension from Honda. JRZ RS Pro coilover shocks with a stiffer front sway bar and also solid spherical joint sway bar end links. The only thing, Mike, that I wish I could do better on this car is because, when this car was first released, it came out with 195 cross-section tires, I think. So it was it was a very conservative setup, and partly probably because it's very comfortable. You've got a full footwell here, and it doesn't really squeeze like, say, a Viper or something, that you could only put, X amount of wide tires. You can't really put very wide tires on here. So for me, when I went with an aftermarket set of fenders, which brings it out about 10 or 15 millimeters, I got the ability to run wider tires, but with the bigger brakes, with the decreased offset wheels, it pushed out my scrub radius. So being a manual steering car, when you start pushing things out, it does become the leverage is quite a bit more increased. So one of the things I'm looking as my project for this year is I do want to retrofit a newer electronic power steering from a newer generation NSX into this one, which a lot of folks will think is blasphemy, but I think that with the trade-offs, and that steering rack is I actually enjoy that steering rack quite a bit too. So I'm looking forward to doing that maybe this year or next year.
Or if you wanted to spend a lot of money and really mess up the car, you could have us redesign your whole front suspension.
Hey, there you go. I saw the incredible work on the FDRX7 with the fabrication that went into that one and really doing it right. And absolutely, that's definitely an option.
I see you've done some really cool aero enhancements that aren't too obvious, but are pretty intensive under the car.
The newer generation Type R for this year, I want to say 2002 and up, they engineered this flat bottom piece, which does not come in a normal NSX, and that front flat bottom piece that goes over the bumper. It does feel quite a bit more stable, whether or not it create downforce or not. It certainly reduced lift with the way this underbody panel on this front section works.
So you can actually feel the difference from a practical standpoint.
Yeah, with my old stock setup, with the pop-up headlights, without any of this damping, without the vented hood actually is quite a bit of improvement as far as aero goes. Going over, say, 100 miles an hour, you really feel that front end lighten up. You can feel because you start to be able to move the steering wheel 3-4 degrees without the car going anywhere. There's so much lift. But with this setup, you still preserve a lot of that steering feel even at those speeds. So 100%, it absolutely does work.
Let's check out the rear of the car.
Sure.
So of course I see the Comtech headers, the exhaust system, and the high flow cats. You want to talk to us about your rear suspension mods?
Sure. So rear suspension mods back here. Really the only thing different from a factory NSX is on the rear section of the suspension, it's got all solid spherical joints on the toe end links. What they call the compliance pivot joints on the lower control arm has been replaced with a offset hard bushing in there to give you a little bit more camber adjustment, but also to reduce a lot of that compliance. But where in this car, especially with them getting so old now, those bushings start to get soft and rotted and cracked, etc., that it creates a lot of dynamic toe out when you're turning hard that really just kind of screws with you and catches many people off guard. And you just, once you stiffen up that whole section, you get rid of a lot of that at the expense of, you know, some NVH or whatever. But I thought that the trade-off was well worth it. So back here, as far as suspension, we're using the factory Zanardi or Type S in Japan rear sway bar, which is slightly thicker. I forget exactly what millimeter. I want to say 19 versus original 17. Also the GRZ RS Pros in the back as far as damping, running an equal spring setup, 9K front and rear on this car.
That's a pretty stiff spring for a car this light.
Right now the car wet is about 2,700, 2,750 pounds, which, you know, is pretty light. But with a set of quality dampers, I think that you can get away with a lot of harshness and comfort with a set of good dampers. And so far the GRZs they've been working really well for me. One of the things that was also upgraded on this car that you can't see, but it's got the JDM factory shorter gears. So gears 1 through 4 is shorter on this car than a normal USDM car. And it's also got an aftermarket LSD in here. So with those two things, stock final drive. With those two things, it's really just, you know, it's kind of that GT3 level car that it's as much of a race car as I want it to be without it taking away from its street ability. Just a challenge that we're working with right now is because it's a transaxle, is trying to find just that right mix of oil and the weight of the oil so that it doesn't chatter as much, or it's also still, you know, it's good on the synchros for shifting. So we're still kind of playing with the different weights.
Is your clutch a twin disc?
This is a twin disc floating style, also from OS Geekend. It is their STR2C, which is, I think, their aggressive street version. It's not really that super kind of on and off feel that some of their lighter clutches have.
I guess one last question. So you have a low compliance bushing in the rear of the lower control arm pivot.
That's right.
And then low compliance in your toe link, but the front bushing is stock, right?
Yeah, the front bushing is still stock. Probably on the to-do list as far as swapping that out. But because the handling is, and you can probably talk to this better than I can, with the dynamic toe portion of what that introduces or removes, it's quite predictable as it is now. So as far as any future modifications, I'd probably just want to convert that to just a brand new OEM rubber. But maybe, you know, with some of your thoughts, you can tell me.
Well, what it'll do is it'll make it tend to toe in dynamically. So it'll be more stable, like when you're in the corner and you have lateral load.
Sure. That's great because, you know, here in California, we don't have a lot of open roads to go very fast, which, you know, I can't make use of a 400, 500 horsepower motor at that point, but we have a lot of curves and we have a lot of canyon roads and we have a decent amount of racetrack. So I'll take that under advisement. Absolutely. I'll look into that. There are some folks who make a solid rear or solid bushing for that area.
Like a lot of people like willy-nilly change bushings. They don't take into account what it could do to the geometry, and also with a multi-link suspension, you always have to worry about bind.
Sure.
And a lot of times you can't put a solid bushing in a lot of these multi-links. Well, there you have it. This is one well thought out feature car. And it's a feature car that's MotoIQ approved. If you want to see more feature car videos like this, be sure to give the video a like and let us know what kind of cars you'd like to see next in the comments. If you think it sucked, let us know what you would like to see to make it better. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and share a link with all your gearhead friends.